There is a kind of woman the world forgets too easily, not because she is small, but because she chooses to be quiet. Vanessa was that kind of woman. She stood at the edge of a long dinner table, wearing a simple navy dress, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Around her, voices rose and fell like waves, businessmen laughing, glasses clinking, deals being whispered over expensive food. And at the center of it all was her husband, Richard Cole, holding court like a king. "I built this company from absolutely nothing," Richard said, spreading his arms wide. "No handouts, no connections, just hard work and vision." The guests nodded. They clapped. One man in a gray suit leaned forward and said, "Richard, you're an inspiration." Richard smiled the way people do when they already believe their own story. Vanessa said nothing. She had heard this speech before, word for word. She knew where he paused for effect. She knew which line got the loudest laugh. She had, in fact, helped him rehearse it 3 years ago, in their kitchen, before his first big investor meeting. Then Richard turned slightly and noticed she was standing too close to the conversation. "Vanessa doesn't really understand the business side of things," he said lightly, chuckling. "She keeps the home warm. That's her department." Laughter rippled through the table. Vanessa smiled. But her eyes said something else entirely. 2 weeks later, Richard met his friends at a private rooftop lounge in the city. The kind of place with no prices on the menu and a view that made ordinary people feel powerful. Kelvin arrived first, loud, sharp-tongued, always performing. Then Brian Scott, who collected luxury watches and opinions he hadn't earned. Richard came last, and when he walked in, both men stood as though greeting royalty. They ordered expensive whiskey. They talked about money. "Richard, honestly," Kelvin said, leaning back in his chair, "sometimes I wonder how you manage everything. The empire, the image, with her beside you." Richard swirled his glass. "What do you mean? Come on. She's a nice woman, sure, but she's not exactly." Kelvin searched for the word. "Your level." Brian smirked behind his glass. Richard laughed, the kind of laugh that says, I know. You're not wrong. Honestly, between us." He paused, lowered his voice just slightly, the way people do when they want everyone to hear. "Vanessa is more of a liability than anything." The men laughed. They didn't notice the soft footsteps near the entrance. They didn't notice the woman in a dark coat who had arrived to drop off documents Richard had forgotten at home. They didn't notice her stop. They didn't notice her hear every word. Vanessa stood completely still for 3 seconds. Then she set the envelope on the reception desk quietly and walked back to her car. Not one tear. Not one sound. That evening, Vanessa made jollof rice and fried plantain, Richard's favorite. She set the table with care. She lit the candle he never noticed. She poured his juice before he asked. Richard came home, talking loudly on his phone. He sat down, still talking. He ate without looking at the food. When the call ended, he exhaled and reached for more rice. "Good day?" Vanessa asked. "Brilliant," he said. "Closed the Meridian contract. I've been working that deal for months." Vanessa nodded slowly. She picked up her fork. The Meridian contract. She knew that name very well. 3 months ago, Richard had come home frustrated, saying the deal was dead. The client had gone cold. Vanessa had quietly made a call to an old contact at the Meridian board. She had sent a revised proposal, restructured, reworded, stronger. She had never told Richard she did it. The deal had come back to life the following week. Richard had celebrated alone in his office, calling Kelvin to share the news. Now he sat across from her, spooning food into his mouth, talking about his brilliance. Vanessa looked at him carefully, not with anger, with something quieter and heavier than anger. She was beginning to understand something she had spent years refusing to see, that the man sitting across from her did not simply forget to credit her. He genuinely believed he did it alone. That realization settled in her chest like a stone. The gathering was at Natasha Reed's house. All glass walls and borrowed elegance. Natasha was the kind of woman who smiled with her teeth and watched with her eyes. She hosted events the way some people fought wars, carefully and without mercy. Vanessa came because Richard said she had to. "Don't embarrass me," he murmured in the car. "Just smile." Don't bring up things you don't understand. Vanessa said nothing. Inside, the women gathered in one corner, the men in another. Vanessa sat at the edge of a cream sofa, holding a glass of water, listening. I don't know how she manages, Natasha said, loud enough to carry. Living that simple life. Same bag, same style. Every time. The women around her laughed softly. Some people are just comfortable with being average, another woman said, glancing briefly toward Vanessa. Vanessa did not look up. Richard was across the room, laughing with Kelvin and Brian. He had not looked her way once since they arrived. Natasha leaned closer to her circle. I heard she used to work in finance or something. Years ago, but clearly that didn't last. More laughter. Vanessa set her glass down on the side table with a soft click. She smoothed her skirt. She folded her hands. And somewhere deep inside her, behind the composure, behind the silence, behind the careful smile, something shifted. Something that had been sleeping for a very long time cracked open one eye. It did not make a sound, but it woke up. If you had watched Vanessa's life from the outside, you might have thought she was simply a quiet woman in a big man's shadow. But look closer. Look at the details. The Meridian contract, Richard's biggest win of that year, restructured by Vanessa's hand. The investor meeting in March, prepared word for word from notes Vanessa wrote on the back of a grocery receipt and left on Richard's desk. The connection with Chief Adebayo's firm, made through a phone call Vanessa placed to a woman she once mentored 6 years before she met Richard. The office lease that came in 30% under budget, because Vanessa had negotiated it quietly while Richard was in Lagos celebrating a deal that hadn't closed yet. Every pillar, every breakthrough, every fortunate coincidence. There was nothing coincidental about it. Richard would come home with good news, his chest full and wide. He would call his friends, open wine, and speak about his instincts, his timing, his gift. And Vanessa would sit across from him, nodding, passing the bread, listening. She had never asked for credit. She had told herself it was love, that supporting him was enough, that the work mattered more than the name attached to it. But sitting alone on their balcony one evening, watching the city lights flicker below, she asked herself a question she had never let herself ask before. What am I doing this for? The city had no answer, but something inside Vanessa did. She heard it through the wall. Richard was in his study, the door half open, phone pressed to his ear. His voice was relaxed, the way it got when he spoke to Kelvin without filters. Vanessa passed the hallway on her way to the kitchen. She was not listening. She was not trying to hear. But she heard. I don't know, man. Sometimes I think keeping her around is more trouble than it's worth. A pause. Laughter on the other end. Then Richard again, lighter now, as if the thought amused him. She's more of a burden than anything. Honestly, Vanessa stopped walking. She stood in the hallway, in the dark, in her house slippers, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold. There was no anger in his voice. No guilt. No hesitation. He said it the way you say the weather is cloudy. The way you say the traffic was bad. Just a fact. A casual, unbothered fact. That was the part that cut deepest. Not the words. The ease. Vanessa walked to the kitchen. She poured the cold tea down the sink. She washed the cup. She dried it. She put it back on the shelf. She stood at the window and looked at the dark garden below. She did not cry. She did not shake. She simply became very, very still, the way water becomes still right before it freezes. And in that stillness, something inside her made a decision. That night, Vanessa could not sleep. Richard snored softly beside her, the deep, undisturbed sleep of a man with no guilt weighing on his chest. She lay still for a long time, staring at the ceiling, counting the shadows the curtains made. Then she sat up slowly. She moved to the small chair by the window, the one Richard always put clothes on but never sat in. She sat in it now, in the dark, in the quiet. She thought about the woman she used to be. Before Richard. Before the wedding. Before she traded a corner office for a corner of someone else's story. She had been sharp. She had walked into boardrooms and turned failing companies around in 6 months. She had been written about, once, in a financial journal, as one of the most quietly powerful consultants in the industry. She had a gift for seeing what others missed, for reading people, for knowing exactly which thread to pull to unravel or rebuild a thing. She had given all of that up. For love. For a man who now called her a burden on the phone with his friends. Vanessa looked down at her left hand. At the ring on her finger. The gold band Richard had slid on with tears in his eyes. Back, when he still looked at her like she was the most important thing in the room. Slowly, she took it off. She held it in her palm. She whispered to herself. So quietly, even the silence almost didn't hear. I remember now. Her name was Eleanor Grant. 61 years old. Silver hair. A voice that could silence a room without raising. She had been Vanessa's first employer. The woman who looked at a 24-year-old with a worn portfolio and said, You're going to be extraordinary. Vanessa called her on a Tuesday morning while Richard was in a meeting. Eleanor picked up on the second ring. I was wondering when you'd call, Eleanor said. There was no small talk. There was no need for it. Vanessa explained, calmly, cleanly, without bitterness, what her life had become, what she had given, what she had lost. Eleanor listened without interrupting. When Vanessa finished, there was a brief silence. You know, Eleanor said finally, your name still carries weight in this city. More than you think. I've had 3 executives ask about you in the last year alone. I told them you were on a personal project. Vanessa laughed, a small, tired sound. I want to come back, she said. I know. They met for coffee the next day. Eleanor slid a small black card across the table. Access to a network. A circle of women who made decisions that shaped cities. A door that had been waiting, unlatched, all along. There's a gala in 6 weeks, Eleanor said. The Grand City Gala. I'm hosting. I want you there, not as Richard Cole's wife. She paused. As yourself. Vanessa looked at the card for a long moment. Then she picked it up. Vanessa moved quietly. She always had. She borrowed a small office space from Eleanor's firm. Just a desk, a laptop, and a window that looked out over the city she had once known well. She came in early. She left before anyone thought to notice. She pulled up old files. Old contacts. Old instincts. It came back faster than she expected. Like a language you grew up speaking. Your mind remembers it even when your tongue has been silent for years. The first move was small. Deliberate. Kelvin Hart owned a mid-sized logistics firm that had been bleeding for 8 months. Bad management. Worse decisions. The kind of slow collapse that smells obvious from the outside, but that Kelvin was too proud to admit. Vanessa reviewed his company's financials through a proxy contact. She restructured the funding through a shell investment firm. Clean, untraceable. Just enough capital injected at exactly the right pressure point. She never signed her name. Within 2 weeks, Kelvin's firm stopped bleeding. Within a month, it stabilized. On a Saturday evening, she overheard Kelvin through a phone call Richard had on speaker in the living room. Brother, I don't know what happened, Kelvin was saying, his voice full and bright. A miracle investment came through. Out of nowhere. God is good. Richard laughed. You're living right, man. Vanessa, folding laundry in the next room, allowed herself one small, private smile. She pressed a shirt flat and set it aside. There was more work to do. Natasha Reed was not a woman who accepted failure quietly. When her fashion label began losing ground, contracts falling through, a flagship event canceled, suppliers growing cold, she did what she always did. She performed confidence until something changed. But nothing was changing. Until it did. An anonymous funding proposal arrived through a boutique investment firm. Terms were clean. Generous. No strings visible. Natasha's business manager reviewed it, confirmed it was solid, and Natasha signed within 48 hours. By the following week, 2 canceled contracts returned. A new supplier came through with better rates. The fashion label breathed again. Natasha celebrated loudly. She posted on every platform. She held a small dinner and raised a glass to her powerful connections and her gift for attracting the right energy. The universe rewards those who stay bold, she said, laughing, her champagne glass catching the light. Her friends cheered. Across the city, Vanessa sat at her desk, reviewing the next file. She had done her part. She had asked nothing in return. The money was not charity. It was a loan with quiet terms, managed through a firm no one in Natasha's circle would think to trace. Vanessa leaned back. She thought about the evening at Natasha's house. The laughter, the words about average lives and simple women. She did not feel anger. She felt something more interesting. She felt patience. Because patience, she had learned, was simply power with good manners. And she was only getting started. Richard's friends were glowing. Kelvin's firm was growing. Natasha's label was rising. Brian's property deal, which had stalled for months, had suddenly found a silent partner willing to bridge the gap. He told no one how it happened. He barely understood it himself. They gathered at Richard's house on a Friday evening, relaxed and loud and pleased with themselves. Richard cracked open a bottle he'd been saving. Kelvin sprawled on the couch like a man who had forgotten last month's panic. "Things are moving," Brian said, nodding slowly. "All of us at the same time. That's not coincidence. That's what happens when you move with the right network," Richard said, pointing at Kelvin. "Energy is contagious." They laughed. "Richard, your circle is blessed," Natasha said, raising her glass. Richard smiled. "We're all just aligned." In the kitchen, Vanessa was arranging a tray of small chops. She could hear every word through the open door. She moved slowly, slicing, plating, not rushing. She heard her husband accept praise for the energy of a circle he believed he led. She heard his friends toast to his network, his vision, his pull. She carried the tray out. She set it on the table. She smiled when someone said thank you. She went back to the kitchen. She stood at the counter. She looked out the window at the dark sky. And she thought, not with bitterness, but with the quiet certainty of a woman who sees the whole board clearly. "They are celebrating me. They just don't know it yet." Richard began to notice something, though he could not name what it was. It was a small thing at first, a shift in the air around Vanessa. She was still quiet, still composed, still present in all the ways a wife was supposed to be present. But something in the texture of her silence had changed. Before, her silence had felt soft, like she was simply not there. Now it felt different, deliberate, like the silence of someone who was watching, thinking, waiting. He caught her once, standing on the balcony, staring at the city with a look on her face he didn't recognize. She wasn't sad. She wasn't distracted. She looked, and this was the word that stuck in his mind, though it unsettled him. She looked focused. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "Nothing," she said, and smiled. He almost believed her. The Grand City Gala was 3 weeks away. Richard was already preparing. His suit, his talking points, who he needed to impress, which deals could be moved forward over a handshake in the right room. One morning, he stopped Vanessa in the hallway. "About the gala," he said. "I need you to be careful. This is a big event. Important people. I don't want you drawing attention to yourself or saying the wrong things." He said it gently, like advice. Vanessa looked at him. "Of course," she said. She walked away, and Richard stood in the hallway, watching her go, with the strange and uncomfortable feeling that something, somewhere, had already slipped beyond his control. She started slowly, the way skilled people always do. A new blazer first. Deep burgundy. Cut cleanly. The kind of piece that does not shout, it simply commands. She bought it herself, from a boutique downtown, and hung it in the back of her wardrobe where Richard would not see it. Then she called Chidi Okafor, a financial strategist she had mentored years ago, now running a respected firm in the city. She had not spoken to him in 4 years. "Vanessa Cole," he said when he heard her voice. "I thought you had retired from us permanently." "I took a break," she said. "The industry did not take a break from missing you." They met for lunch, then twice more after that. He introduced her quietly, no announcements, no formal return, to 2 senior executives who were navigating a difficult acquisition. She reviewed their terms. She made 3 suggestions. All 3 were implemented. Both men sent handwritten notes. Within 2 weeks, she was fielding quiet requests from 3 other contacts. Old colleagues, old clients, people who had worked with her before and remembered what she was. They spoke of her the way people speak of a thing they thought was gone, with relief, with surprise, with something close to reverence. "We thought you'd step back," one woman told her. "I did," Vanessa said simply, "but I didn't disappear." She walked taller now, not with arrogance, with the particular confidence of someone who has finally remembered exactly who they are. The requests kept coming. A telecommunications director needed someone to review a partnership structure before signing. An old contact from her early career was preparing to take her company public and needed a second pair of eyes she could trust. A regional bank was quietly restructuring its advisory board. Vanessa handled each one from Eleanor's small office. She worked in the early mornings, before Richard was awake, and in the afternoons, when he was at his own office. She left no visible trace. She also kept watching. She noticed that two of Richard's current deals, the ones he spoke about most proudly over dinner, were being shaped by forces he could not see. A favorable regulatory shift that Vanessa had learned about through Eleanor's network. A key supplier who had been persuaded to renew by a mutual contact Vanessa had quietly reached out to. Richard knew none of it. He came home energized, talking about his instincts, his timing, how he always seemed to find the right angle. Vanessa passed him bread. She asked whether he wanted more water. She did not tell him. She was learning something about power that she hadn't fully understood before, that the most effective kind was the kind no one could see. Not because it was hiding, but because the people who should have been paying attention were too busy looking at themselves. The gala was 2 weeks away. Vanessa ordered her custom gown, and the city, this city that had forgotten her name, was about to remember it. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday, thick cream envelope, embossed lettering, sealed with dark green wax. Richard opened it at the breakfast table. The Grand City Gala, hosted by Eleanor Grant, the most important event of the year. Every powerful name in the city would be in that room. Investors, executives, civic leaders, people who turned ordinary meetings into major decisions just by being present. Richard sat up straighter. He read it twice. "This is significant," he said. Vanessa refilled his coffee. "I know people on Eleanor Grant's board," Richard said, already planning. "This is the kind of room that can take things to the next level. I need to be at the right tables. Talk to the right people." He glanced at Vanessa. "You'll come," he said. "Not a question. A requirement. Something to complete the picture. But Vanessa, I mean it. This is serious. Don't overdress. Don't try to insert yourself into conversations. Just be present." Quietly, Vanessa looked at him. "Just be present," she repeated softly. "Exactly." She nodded once. Richard folded the invitation and slipped it into his jacket pocket. He finished his coffee. He left. Vanessa stood alone in the kitchen holding the empty cup. She looked at the door he had just walked through. She thought about the gala, about the room, about Eleanor, about the gown currently being finished by a seamstress 2 streets over. She set the cup down. Her expression was very, very calm, which, those who knew her well would have understood, was the most telling sign of all. She almost didn't go into the boutique. She had been passing by, on her way to Eleanor's office, when she heard voices through the half-open door. Familiar voices. She stopped without meaning to. Natasha, and 2 women from her circle. "She'll probably show up in something plain," Natasha was saying, her voice carrying that lazy, careless cruelty of someone who never expects to be heard. "You know how she is. No taste. No idea." Laughter. "I genuinely don't understand what Richard was thinking," one of the others said. "She just doesn't belong in rooms like that." "She doesn't belong in rooms like anything," Natasha said. "She's a nice enough woman, I suppose. But that's all she is." More laughter. The sound of hangers moving. Shoes clicking on the floor. Vanessa stood on the pavement outside. She could have walked away instantly. She could have felt the pain of it. And there was pain, a small and honest pain, and moved on quickly. But she stood there for 5 full seconds. She looked at her own reflection in the shop window. Her face. Her eyes. She thought about the gown being finished 2 streets over. Floor length. Dark gold. The kind of piece that didn't try to impress anyone. It simply arrived. She thought about the gala. About the moment she would walk in. Then she smiled. Quiet. Private. Belonging to no one but herself. She continued walking. The seamstress was waiting. The gown was extraordinary. Dark gold silk, floor length, with a structure that moved as she moved. Not stiff, not dramatic, just perfectly balanced. The seamstress, a small woman named Titi who had been sewing for 40 years, stood back when Vanessa put it on and simply said, "There it is." Vanessa looked at herself in the full-length mirror. She had not looked at herself this way in a very long time. Not quickly, not critically, not checking whether something was acceptable, but truly, carefully looking. She looked like herself, not Richard's wife, not the woman in the background of other people's photographs, not the one who served the food and cleared the table and smiled when she was supposed to smile. Herself. Eleanor called that evening. "Are you ready?" Eleanor asked. "Almost," Vanessa said. "You know what tomorrow means." Vanessa did know. She knew because Eleanor had shared it with her quietly, a week ago, that the gala program included a formal recognition segment, that Vanessa's recent work had been noticed by people who mattered, that the anonymous investor behind several of the city's recent business recoveries had been traced, professionally, discreetly, to her. Eleanor intended to make it known. Publicly. Clearly. In a room full of the city's most powerful people. "Richard will be there," Vanessa said. "I know," Eleanor replied. A pause. "They won't recognize you," Eleanor said softly. Vanessa looked at the gown one last time. "Good," she said. Richard left at 6. He was dressed sharply, dark suit, cufflinks, a tie Vanessa had given him 2 Christmases ago. He stood in front of the mirror for a long time, adjusting and readjusting, and then turned and gave Vanessa a look that said without words, "Remember what I told you." "Don't be late," he said. "I won't," she said. He left without kissing her. She heard his car pull out of the gate. She listened until the sound disappeared. Then she went to the bedroom. She sat at the mirror. She took her time. She did her own makeup, not heavily, but with intention. A clean foundation. A warm eye. A deep, quiet lip. She pinned her hair up slowly, letting 2 small pieces fall loose at her face. She put on the gown. She put on the earrings. Gold, simple, borrowed from no one. She looked at herself once. She picked up her clutch. She walked to the front door. She paused at the door. She looked back at the house, the kitchen where she had made 10,000 quiet sacrifices, the hallway where she had stood in the dark and heard herself called a burden, the balcony where she had asked the night sky what she was doing with her life. She breathed in slowly. She breathed out. She stepped outside. Her car was waiting, and something about the way she walked toward it, back straight, chin level, eyes forward, told the night air that what came next would not be small. The Grand City Gala was exactly what it was supposed to be. Crystal chandeliers, round tables in white linen, a string quartet playing softly near the entrance. Hundreds of the city's most important people, dressed, composed, performing the graceful rituals of power. Richard had arrived early and found his position. He was already mid-conversation with a property developer near the bar when the room shifted. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. There were no announcements. Just a slight change in the quality of attention. The way people turned not all at once, but one by one, like flowers bending slowly toward sun. A woman had walked in. Dark gold gown. Measured steps. Unhurried. Her head held the way it is held by someone who does not need the room's approval to feel that she belongs in it. The string quartet did not stop playing, but 2 musicians missed their notes. Across the room, a silver-haired woman in a midnight blue dress looked up from her conversation and smiled, a wide, warm, proud smile. "Eleanor." Whispers began. Heads turned. Men and women who ran departments and signed contracts leaned toward each other with quiet recognition. Richard heard the shift and looked toward the entrance. He saw his wife. He did not recognize her for 3 full seconds. And in those 3 seconds, something in his chest moved, something that felt like awe, and then immediately afterwards, like the very first edge of fear. He had not seen this woman before, but she had always been here. She did not look for him. That was the thing. That was the detail that would stay with people later when they described the evening. She walked in, and she did not sweep the room looking for her husband's face. She did not check whether he had noticed. She simply moved, with the calm authority of someone who had already decided how this night would go. Eleanor reached her first, pulling her into a warm embrace. Then others came. Chief Adebayo, a man whose name opened doors across the country, crossed the room to greet her. He held both her hands and said, loudly enough for nearby guests to hear, "Vanessa Cole, finally, this city has been missing you." A woman who ran the largest private equity firm in the region touched her arm and said, "I've heard so much. We need to talk before the night is over." Chidi Okafor appeared and introduced her to two men she hadn't met. Serious men, the kind who measured everything. And they looked at her the way people look at someone whose reputation has arrived before them. Richard watched from across the room. He watched the circles form around her. He watched the ease with which she moved through them. He watched people lean toward her, not politely, not out of duty, but with real, undisguised interest. Kelvin appeared at his shoulder. "Richard," Kelvin said slowly, "is that Vanessa?" Richard did not answer. He was watching a woman he thought he knew, be known, fully, completely, by a room he had always believed was his. The whispers began before the first course was served. At table 4, a woman who ran a regional investment council leaned toward her neighbor and said, "Someone told me the anonymous investor, the one behind Kelvin Hart's revival and Natasha's label, is here tonight." Her neighbor raised an eyebrow. "Who?" "I don't know yet, but Eleanor knows." At table 9, two men in finance compared notes quietly. The investment patterns had been noticed, the way the money moved, the precision of the timing, the exact pressure points targeted. It was not the work of a fund. It was the work of a person. One specific, extraordinarily skilled person. "It's almost like someone with insider knowledge of each company," one man said. At table 12, Natasha sat with her glass of wine, laughing about something. But her eyes kept moving toward the far end of the room, where a woman in dark gold was having what appeared to be a very serious conversation with Chief Adebayo. Something nagged at her. She couldn't place it. Richard moved through the room, making conversation, but his focus was fractured. He kept finding Vanessa in his peripheral vision, kept watching strangers greet her warmly, kept feeling the strange, disorienting sensation of seeing someone you believed you understood, and understanding, slowly, that you never did. Eleanor moved toward the stage. The room's noise shifted, quieter, more attentive. Richard stopped. He watched Eleanor take the microphone, and something cold and certain moved through him. "Good evening," Eleanor said. The room settled. "Tonight is not only about celebrating progress in our city. Tonight is about recognizing the people who make that progress happen, often without any recognition at all." She paused. "Many of you have heard about a series of strategic investments made over the past 3 months. Kelvin Hart's logistics firm, a prominent fashion label, a property development bridge fund, all brought back from the edge, all revived through precise, intelligent, anonymous support." The room was very quiet now. Natasha's glass stopped halfway to her mouth. Kelvin went still. Richard stopped breathing. "Tonight, I want to remove the anonymity," Eleanor said, "and give credit where it has always belonged." She looked across the room, directly, warmly, and the room followed her gaze. Vanessa Cole. The name landed in the room like a stone in still water. A ripple, then a wave. Vanessa rose from her chair slowly. She straightened. She walked toward the stage with the same measured steps she had used to enter, unhurried, unbothered, complete. The applause began unevenly, surprise making people slow, and then built quickly into something full and genuine. Richard did not move. He stood near the back, one hand resting on a table, watching his wife walk toward a stage in a room full of the city's most powerful people. And as the applause grew, a single thought arrived in his chest. Not anger, not pride. Just the cold, hollow recognition of a man who has just understood something irreversible. Vanessa stood at the microphone. She looked at the room. She did not look at Richard. She let the applause settle naturally, not cutting it short, not prolonging it. She simply waited until the room was ready. Then she spoke. "I spent several years being very quiet," she said. Her voice was clear and even. Not hard, not soft. Exactly level. "I told myself that was a choice. That it was enough to do the work without needing the name attached to it. That love was its own reward." A pause. But silence, when it is not chosen freely, is just a cage with no visible bars. The room was absolutely still. "I am not here tonight to settle any score. I don't have a score to settle." She glanced briefly, in Richard's direction, then away. I am here because this city deserves to know who has been in it. Working, rebuilding, caring about its people and its businesses. She straightened slightly. I was never a liability. Her voice did not rise. It did not need to. I was the foundation that others stood on. And the only mistake I made was not knowing my own worth sooner. She stepped back from the microphone. She nodded once at Eleanor. She walked calmly from the stage, back through the applauding room, past tables of people who now looked at her with new eyes. And she did not look left or right. She looked straight ahead. And she did not look at Richard at all. The room had changed. Not loudly, not with drama, but the way rooms change when a truth has been spoken into them. A slight rearrangement of who matters and who is merely present. People moved toward Vanessa. The conversations that had been circling Richard all evening now had somewhere else to go. Hands were extended to her. Cards were pressed into hers. People wanted her attention, her ear, her counsel. Kelvin sat at his table with an expression that had no name, halfway between shame and calculation, trying to work out what this meant for him. Natasha had stopped performing. She sat very still, looking at the table, her champagne untouched. Brian said nothing. He understood everything. Richard moved through the room. Not with confidence now, with urgency. He was looking for Vanessa. He needed to reach her. He needed to say something, though he did not yet know what. But every time he moved toward her, the crowd around her had thickened. People greeted her, held her in conversation, drew her deeper into their circles. She was not hiding from him. She was not avoiding him. She was simply occupied, in demand, belonging to a room in a way he had never imagined. He finally got close enough. Vanessa, he said. She turned. She looked at him, not with anger, not with triumph, with something quieter and more final. The look of a woman who has made a decision, and the decision is done. Richard, she said simply. Then someone touched her arm and drew her back into conversation. And Richard stood alone at the edge of a room that had stopped being his. 3 months passed. They passed the way things pass when the end of something has already happened and the paperwork is just catching up. Documents were signed quietly. The house was arranged. 2 lives, which had really been one life leaning on the other for years, were separated cleanly. Richard had tried. Several times. He called. He wrote a letter. He arrived once at Eleanor's building and waited outside for 40 minutes before he understood that Vanessa was not going to come down. He was not a villain in a story. He was something more ordinary and more sad. A man who had mistaken support for weakness and silence for absence, and had spent years eating from a table he never thought to look beneath. He understood that now. Understanding it did not fix it. Vanessa moved into a clean apartment with high windows and a view of the river. She put plants on the sill. She kept the curtains open. She worked from Eleanor's firm officially now, her name on the door, her expertise no longer anonymous. She was not celebrated every day. She was not performing a comeback. She was simply working, living, and being fully herself in a way that took up space without apology. On the day of another city gala, smaller, quieter, she arrived in a simple dark dress and flat shoes. She greeted people she knew. She laughed at a table with Chitty and Eleanor. She was light, not because everything was perfect, but because the heaviest thing she had ever carried, the weight of being unseen by someone who should have seen her, was finally completely gone. She had not lost herself. She had only set herself down for a while, and now she had picked herself back up. That is where the story ends. But that is also, if you listen carefully, where hers began.